I'm Jovita Tam. I'm a business-focused data and AI advisor and also an attorney. In the last 12 months, we have seen a lot of things change. We've seen the evolution of the technology. We have seen that there's a change in terms of social expectations when it comes to responsible deployment of technology, and there's certainly a lot of changes when it comes to the regulatory space. So in the coming 30 minutes, I want to divide our time into two separate parts. In the first part, what I'd like to go over with you are some background and some basics, and I'm excited to share with you some of the takeaways that I've learned in the past year, and let's get started. So let's start off by asking ourselves, what is AI governance? There's a lot of different definitions out there, and this is what I want us to think about, for the next 30 minutes. I would say that AI governance really is about a balance between responsible AI, which is value-driven principles, and on the other hand, managing AI risk. And of the risk that is with AI, I would say that regulatory compliance risk is only one aspect of it. So the key takeaway here is that AI governance, to me, is very much a balancing act. And in addition to that, the scope of AI governance extends well beyond AI compliance. So now I want to share something with you, which you probably have seen in the news in the last 12 months, right? There was a while where there was some major hypes that was going on in our industry. Everybody was very, very excited about chatbots, as was myself. And then there were sort of incidents that happened, and then people realized that, my chatbot has used some pretty strong language against my customer base. So looking at this balancing act, we can then clearly see that although using strong language against your customer is not something that's illegal per se, it is an AI risk that we need to manage. So therefore, crafting the right balance and finding the right definition is extremely important. Next, I want to share something with you coming from the perspective of a yoga teacher, right? So when you see these people doing arm balances, tree pose, and all these wonderful balancing poses, it seems like it's very dynamic, right? It seems very static. It's like, the person is holding it. But the reality is that the minute you feel like you've got your balance, you fall out of your pose. And the same thing is true when it comes to AI governance. Is the minute that you feel like, I've got this, I've reviewed the regulations, I have my checklist, I have my stakeholders, everything is going well. The minute you feel like that, you're going to fall out of it. So that's just something to be mindful of. And I genuinely believe that if we ignore AI governance right now, we'll all get fired. And I'm guessing that's probably this catchy title is why you're here today. And not only would it get all of us fired, I also believe that it would lead to a lot of unintended results. And the reason for that is the risk that comes with AI is multidimensional. We've already just discussed that it extends beyond regulatory and compliance risk. And there are a lot of risks that we are learning as we're deploying this technology, scaling it up, and as things are unfolding. The second thing to keep in mind is that the risk when it comes to AI touches every point in the life cycle. It's not something that we can just do in the beginning. Okay, we're all set, let's get started. Let's never need to think about it ever again. Nor is it something that you go, okay, I'm going to sit here, I'm going to design, I'm going to deploy, or just the minute before, I'm going to sit here and do my demo or sign my SOW or whatever it is, the last stage, right? You're like, okay, there's this thing called AI governance, let's do it now. It really is something that we need to do along the way. And so what I've gathered for you there is my top 3 of how we're all going to get fired if we ignore AI governance. The first is incurring liability when it comes to damaging brand and damaging the industry. So we're all here because we're part of this wonderful community, this wonderful data and AI community. And I believe that we're all responsible for safeguarding the public's credibility, public's trust that they give us, right? If we keep having mishaps and we keep showing up on the front page in a not so desirable way, the public is just going to get more and more weary, and it's going to make our lives more difficult. So I would say the first risk is, damaging brand and damaging reputation. The second thing is, although AI governance extends well beyond AI compliance, the risk that you could potentially incur with the current regulatory landscape is real. With the EU AI Act coming into effect on August 1st, 2024, which is, a month and a half ago, it carries a maximum penalty of 35 million euros and up to a 7% annual turnover. So there's definitely no joke there. And one of the reasons why AI is getting a lot of our attention is because of the potential great impact that it can bring to, not just from a business sense, but from the sense of to society. It has a lot of value, which basically means that equally, we need to look at regulations or legislations, not just directly focuses on AI, because the decisions that we help make have genuine impact. So we're already seeing that perhaps there are cases around discrimination in the employment area per se. So it's important for us to stay vigilant. The last thing is with respect to, and I can't see my own slide, so I'm going to stand a little bit more forward, right, is about we don't want to build something that's not sellable, right? We're working very hard building our product day in, day out. So with AI, it comes the promise that it brings tremendous business value. But we've seen this with other technology, is that if we don't deploy it with the proper guardrails, what would happen is that we would destroy a lot of business value. And I'm going to talk about this in the takeaway section a little bit more, is that with the enforcement of these legislation, with the change in the climate, we're already seeing that the business landscape is changing. Some larger firms are acquiring technology in a different way. So next, we're going to go around the globe and figure out how to navigate the global AI governance legislation and policy landscape. So looking at this, I want to start at the definition, because I can share with you right now that there is no single definition. Every piece of guidance that you read, every piece of legislation that you read is going to have a slightly different, not so much interpretation, maybe their wording around what is AI and what is AI system. So this is very important, because when we look at that specific guidance and when we look at that specific piece of legislation, we need to be on the same page as those people that are writing the words. We need to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. And so on there, I've pulled out sort of a description of AI from LexisNexis, which is a little bit more general. So you can see that some of them are extremely general, some of them are succinct, and there's all sorts of flavors for this. The second thing that I want to highlight is that, yes, the EU AI Act is in effect, and there are many more jurisdictions out there which are pushing out different guidance, different legislation. I can tell you that there's no single international standard at this point. However, the saving grace is that there are definitely shared values and there are common themes that we can rely on. And what I've on there on the screen are three that I really think that are great points and great places for us to start at and take a read. Now, each of them are all hundreds and hundreds of pages long, and you may not have time to go through all of them. But I would definitely say, look at all three of them. Go straight to the definition section, put it side by side and go, okay, so what seems the same? What seems different? Where are they coming from, right? Because as you set up your AI governance program, you're going to have to decide where would you like to come from. How would you like to set up this framework for you to house all of the action items, if you would, that you're going to choose to do now, because that's going to determine how your program is going to evolve over time as everything changes. So great. Although that there aren't any consistent or just one-size-fits-all regulations out there, there are common themes. But are we really on the same page, right? And that was a question that I was asking myself lying in bed the other day. I was lying in bed, staring at my ceiling and counting sheep. And I'm like, did I go to bed at a responsible time that evening, right? And I was there like, thinking about it, and this is probably not great for my sleep quality at night, but this is what I come up with. So I was like, okay, I went to bed about midnight that day. It's like, okay, doesn't sound too bad, right? Going to bed to midnight seems like a responsible time. And then I thought about my friend who consistently go to bed at 3 a.m., right? So normally I would go, if you just pick somebody on the street and go, okay, what's a responsible time for going to bed? Is it midnight or is it 3 a.m.? Most people would be like, I don't know, like midnight seems like a more responsible time for going to bed, right? But what if I told you, hey, I've been like my mind has been racing, it's taking me a little bit longer to go to bed recently, and by the way, like my plan was to wake up at like 5 a.m. in the morning to go out for a run. How do you feel about my like bedtime of midnight that night? Does it still sound so responsible to you? And then what if I tell you, my friend who goes to bed at like 3 a.m. in the morning is an evening person where the best code is like written after midnight. The person start their day way later and they finish their workday maybe at 9 p.m. How do you feel about that? So this is what I want to illustrate, and you're going to see that on the spectrum there. Is although with responsible AI, we're using very similar words and like common concepts, there may not be an overlap. So as we go out there, look at our product, look at our AI governance program, and look at our organization, we really need to find the right context for us, because otherwise we could be using all of the same words and do not have any of what we call meeting of the minds. Okay, next, I promise that this is the last section when it comes to background information and basics, is the EUAI Act. So the EUAI Act is hundreds and hundreds of pages, but I'm going to summarize it into 2 slides for you. The first one is, let's take our own advice and start with the definition. What does the EUAI Act mean when it says AI systems? And this is what it says. AI systems means a machine-based system that is designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy and that may exhibit adaptiveness after deployment, and that for explicit or implicit objectives infers from the input it receives how to generate outputs such as predictions, content, recommendations, or decisions that can influence physical or virtual environments. That's quite a mouthful, right? And I'm seeing some of you guys in the audience with like, kind of eyebrows kind of going like this. Yeah, it is very much a mouthful, and you will see that with a lot of these guidance or legislation, they have this type of a definition where maybe it uses a lot of words. Maybe it's not what us in the data industry feel like, oh, okay, when we come to think about AI, like I highly doubt that this precise string of words is what comes to your mind, right? But it's important as we kind of look at AI governance to recognize that from the legal front, these type of definitions do exist, and as we look at these legislation, keep this in mind. The second thing that I want you to focus on with this definition are all the bolded words. So taking a look at this, right, I would say that this definition is pretty much in plain language, right? It doesn't have any really big words. It doesn't have any really difficult words. But the question is, well, what does this really mean, right? As I implement my program, as I go there and explain to my client that I have their best interest in mind, and as I go there and say, hey, I have worried about taking care of this thing called AI risk, and you can count on us if you use our technology that it's going to be a responsible deployment of technology, what does it mean, right? So the bolded words are words that I do believe that as we push forward in time, we're going to get more context in terms of understanding what it actually means. So here, we have the second slide on the EU AI Act, and also a 4-point summary, if you would. It's an extremely high-level summary, and I've included the source link in the bottom left for you in case you want to take a look at this afterwards, because it gets into a lot more detail. But the 4 takeaways that I want you to have after this talk for the EU AI Act goes as follows. 1, understand that the EU AI Act is a risk-based approach, right? So it clearly outlines that there are certain systems which are deemed unacceptable risk, such as social scoring, such as manipulative AI. These are a big, hard no-no, right? The second thing to keep in mind is that in this risk-based approach, the majority of the text is devoted to high-risk AI systems. Now, I want us to pause here, because going back to our first slide about AI governance, we talked about it being a balancing act, right? We talked about that there are things that, although it's not considered a regulatory compliance risk, it's still something that we very much need to pay attention to when it comes to our AI governance program. So this is a good example. So you could have read the definition just now and go, okay, well, I do have a lot of stuff in my portfolio that falls into that definition, but oh no, this EU AI Act thing is mostly just on high-risk systems. So maybe I don't fall into that, and I'm cool, right? I don't have to think about it. Now, this is where it's not true, because you can still have a lot of risk when it comes to deploying AI, where it's not considered a high-risk system in this particular act. So I just want to call that out. And the other thing that I want to call out is that because this is a risk-based approach, prioritization is key. And this is what I always say, right? In this type of world, which is often changing, no, perhaps you can't do absolutely everything, but you have to be very selective about what you choose to do and what you choose not to do. Because you can be doing all of 99% of everything, skip out on the most important 1%, and it's going to come and bite you. So that's kind of the beauty and the challenge when it comes to a risk-based approach. The second thing is the operator concept. Simply put, what I'm going to say is, do you know what hat you're wearing? Do you know where you're in the AI value chain? Because this thing is hundreds and hundreds of pages, and there are different responsibilities when it comes to, where you are in the value chain. So as those of us in this room who's likely the closest to the technology, we need to be very good at articulating this to other stakeholders so they can help us make sure that the proper guardrails in place. The third point is that users in the text of the EU AI Act means developers, and it doesn't mean affected end users. So if you, indeed might be having trouble sleeping one night and then want to go through the hundreds and hundreds of pages of Act, and you go through it and it keeps mentioning users, you're like, okay, this thing is not making any sense, right? Then I want you to think back to this moment and go, okay, well, users in this context doesn't mean affected end users. Users are natural or legal persons that deploy an AI system in a professional capacity. And the key word there is professional capacity. And just like in our definition slide, there are bold words where we will get more clarity in understanding where the lines are and what it means over time. This is also something that we're expecting to learn more as we move forward. The last point is that there's much of the EU AI Act which covers GPAI. I'm not going to get into much detail of it here, but just know that there are very specific requirements into that. Now, here, we're about to wrap up the background section and get into the takeaways, which I'm much more excited about. Not that this isn't important, but I presume that most of you already know a lot of these things already. But if you still find this topic interesting, I would say go look up Brussels Effects 2.0. Because of what we've learned with the GDPR and as with the legal scene kind of unfolding over time, there should be plenty of interesting discussions around that topic. So maybe set up a Google alert, who knows? All right, takeaways. So how I've structured the takeaways is into 3 separate slides. So I've divided it for people that are AI leaders, I've divided for business and product owners. And the last bit is for CDOs and CDAOs. But what I want to emphasize before we get started is that AI governance is really a team sport. We need people who are very focused on the technology. We need business people. We need lawyers. We need data governance people. And we need everybody on board. So depending on how your organization is set up, you might find that you're wearing multiple of these hats, or 20% of this hat, 50% of the other, and so on. So these are not hard lines, if you would. So first, takeaway, if you've been so lucky to be tasked to be the AI governance leader in your organization, my top tip to you is please say no to multiverse, right? What do I mean by that? Going back to our first slide, that I do believe AI governance is a balancing act between responsible AI and managing AI risk. We need to have a top-down approach which is driven by your organization's understanding of responsible AI. At the same time, we also need to focus on, realistic deliverable items, right, which are much more into managing the AI risk now. And it's very important for this top-down and bottom-up to meet in the middle. Otherwise, you're going to end up running a parallel universe, and worse, if you don't keep this in check now, you're going to end up seeing 3 Spider-Mans in your AI governance program, which is not great. Like, it's great in a Marvel movie, but multiverse is not something that you want to see in your AI governance program. The second thing is, in my opinion, culture eats strategy for lunch, breakfast, dinner, desserts, and 2 snacks, right? And I've seen and implemented data governance program in different places. And this is where culture really makes a difference, right? The reality is, well, is your organization very familiar with the term governance, right? Some organizations are. If you're in the financial services industry, this is something that's very familiar with you. If you're in a nonprofit, or if you are in a government organization, maybe these words are a little bit more foreign to you and your peers. But it doesn't mean that governance don't exist. What this really means is that you have to adapt what you do to the existing culture, because at the end of the day, it's about understanding how decisions are being made in your organization and doing what works. The last point that I have for you is that AI governance is really about change management. The change that we have seen in the last 12 months around technology, around the regulatory landscape, and around people's perception about responsible deployment of the technology will continue to evolve. We're not going to be able to get everything done in one day, right? And so this is going to be a continuous AI change management effort for all of us. And it's also important to remember that although there are different jurisdictions which have set up different regulations and have offered different guidance, over time, we may see it further diverge, or we may see it converge, right? So it's very important to keep people, process, technology in mind so that we can have a sustainable change when it comes to our AI governance program. Next, this is for business executives and product owners. And we've already touched on the first point. Because regulations these days are very specific to, well, this is where you're in the AI value chain. This is the hat that you're wearing. So therefore, these are the responsibilities that we would like you to assume. And because our business executives and product owners are closest to the technology in many cases, what are you looking to achieve? So on and so forth, it's important to be able to articulate this idea to people who may not be as technology driven as ourselves. The second is be an active stakeholder in your organization's governance program. So you may not be responsible for, setting up the whole program, keeping it running on an everyday basis. Nonetheless, you're one of the most important stakeholders in this area. And as we talked about previously, regulatory compliance risk is only one of the many risks when it comes to AI governance. So while you may have lawyers in your organizations that are focusing on that, I think that is very important for product owners to sit here and go, well, what are my other risks? What am I going to do about it, right? So that is extremely important. And the second point, we've actually gone through a little exercise in our talk today, is yes, there's a lot of pieces of the law running, and it would all be great for us to, stay up and read hundreds and hundreds of pages of the law and for all of us to understand it. But that's simply not reality. The important bit here is, as business executives and as product owners, is for us to understand what are the points of legal contention, right? So we've already learned that knowing which hat you're wearing is important. More obligations are on deployers or on people that produce the system. So understand that, okay, as you change your product and as we have better understanding of these terms, maybe your role would change, right? And the obligations that are on your organization would also evolve as well. So understanding the legal kind of points of contention can go a long way. And last is be ready to actually adjust your business model, your strategy, your product roadmap to align with everything that's changing, right? And I've seen this before because a couple of months ago, I had a conversation with somebody and they're like, oh, I got this completely covered. The data that we use to train this model is not copyrighted, that's well documented, and they feel like, okay, I'm completely done, right? While that is one aspect of it, there are many different aspects of it. So for example, it could be the exact same product, but if you go out to the market and say, okay, well, this is the impact that I want to drive, right? It's going to help with this type of decision versus another type of decision that could have completely different risk profiles when it comes to all of this. So it's important to remember that this is not happening in a vacuum. It genuinely does impact your business. So last, I know that I'm running very low on time, so I'm just going to go at this quickly. I have 3 points on here, but it basically all summarizes the same things. As CDOs and as CDAOs, it is now more than ever for us to be familiar and know our data very well. It's important for us to know our CDEs. And it's important for us to drive our conversation to focus on both inputs and outputs. Because thinking back to the conversation that we had, or thinking back to that definition of the EOAI Act, it explicitly mentioned both input and output. And what I'm seeing in the industry right now is that they're still quite skewed in terms of where the conversations are at. And another reason for that is we want to maximize our chances for success up front. And that, I think, comes in 2 things. First of all is in use case selection. I'm hearing a lot about, okay, let's select use cases because it gives us, the biggest business impact, which is obviously important. And the other bit of, well, let's select use cases so that for some, let's wait until we better understand the law and then push those use cases out in the market. But I think as CDOs and CDAOs, it's also important for us to sit here and go, well, this use case has more of a chance to success because we actually have the fit-for-purpose data for it, where other use cases are simply going to wait until data maturity improves in the organization in some cases. And what we're also learning is that traditional model validation tools are hitting its limits when it comes to some of these model validation situations. So what we're also seeing is that there's an increased scrutiny starting with the data preparation stage. And I guess the last bit of it is just, me being in the data community, and this is my kind of shameless plug. I know many of us has been fighting the battle for many years to articulate the value when it comes to having a data governance program. Why are we investing in all of this? Let's leverage this opportunity with respect to the attention around AI governance, the attention around deploying AI for the greater good to push forward our data governance program to get more people to do the right thing. So the future of AI governance for me is definitely about change. The second is there's definitely going to be a lot of wait and see when it comes to legal interpretation. And the last thing is, let's most definitely start now, because as you implement this in your organization, that's when you're going to truly learn what is working and what's not working. Thank you very much for your time today, for sticking with me till the end. I have 3 reflective questions there, and those are independent of each of the roles that you may want to think about. And I'm happy to continue this conversation offline or online. That's my LinkedIn QR code. And thank you again for coming.